The thunderous crack of a gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Wilcox, Arizona, as Victoria Porter's scream died in her throat. One moment she was being shoved into the back of a wagon, a revolver pressed against her temple, and the next her captor was howling in pain, his weapon tumbling into the dirt as blood spurted from his wounded hand. "Step away from the lady," a deep voice commanded from behind the cloud of gun smoke that lingered in the hot summer air of 1885. Victoria turned to see a tall figure approaching on horseback, his rifle still raised and aimed at the man who had tried to abduct her. His silhouette was unmistakable against the setting sun, broad shoulders beneath a weathered duster, a Stetson pulled low over his eyes, and the confident posture of someone who knew how to handle himself in a fight. The wounded man clutched his bleeding hand to his chest, his face contorted with rage. "This ain't your business, stranger," he spat, even as he backed away from Victoria. "When you force a lady into a wagon at gunpoint in broad daylight, you make it everybody's business," the rider replied, dismounting with fluid grace that belied his size. As he stepped closer, Victoria could see his features more clearly, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, intense eyes that missed nothing, and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the harsh western sky. Her would-be kidnapper glanced frantically between Victoria, his fallen gun, and the approaching stranger. With a curse, he scrambled backward, then turned and fled down an alley between the general store and the saloon. "Are you hurt, madam?" the cowboy asked, lowering his rifle as he approached her. Victoria felt her knees weaken as the reality of what had almost happened washed over her. I don't think so," she managed, though her voice trembled. "He grabbed me as I was leaving the dressmaker's shop. I don't even know who he is." "Name's Xavier Thornton," the man said, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair. "Most folks call me Zav. Victoria Porter," she replied automatically, trying to steady herself. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Thornton." "No thanks needed," he said, replacing his hat. "Though we ought to report this to Sheriff Wilkins. Man like that is bound to cause more trouble." Victoria nodded, still shaken. She'd only been in Wilcox for 3 weeks, having arrived from Boston to take over her late aunt's millinery shop. Nothing in her sheltered Eastern upbringing had prepared her for this. "I've never," she began, then stopped as her voice cracked. "I've never had a gun pointed at me before." Xavier Thornton's expression softened slightly. "First time for everything out here in the territory, Miss Porter." "Not all of it pleasant." He glanced at the wagon where her abductor had tried to force her. "Do you recognize this rig?" Victoria shook her head. "No, I know most of the wagons in town by now, but this one." She studied it more carefully. "Wait, there's something painted on the side." "Circled R Ranch," Xavier's face hardened. "Riker's outfit, that explains a few things." "Riker," Victoria repeated, the name unfamiliar to her. "Emmett Riker. Owns the biggest spread north of town. Man's got more money than sense and twice as much meanness as either." Xavier offered his arm. "Come on, Miss Porter. Sheriff's office is this way." As they walked down Wilcox's Main Street, Victoria was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople who had witnessed the confrontation. She'd been working hard to establish herself as a respectable businesswoman, and now this incident would be the talk of the town. "You're new to Wilcox," Xavier observed, though it wasn't really a question. 3 weeks, Victoria confirmed. "My Aunt Beatrice passed away and left me her shop." "I was her only living relative." "Beatrice Porter," Xavier nodded. "Good woman. Made the best hats west of the Mississippi, folks said." "I'm trying to live up to her reputation," Victoria said, feeling strangely comforted that this man had known her aunt. "Did you know her well?" "Not well, but enough to tip my hat when I'd see her. She never put on airs, treated everyone the same whether they were wearing calico or silk. He gave Victoria a sidelong glance. "You have her eyes." Victoria felt a flush rise to her cheeks, unexpected in the aftermath of such a frightening experience. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." They reached the sheriff's office, a square adobe building with barred windows and a weathered wooden sign. Inside, Sheriff Wilkins looked up from his desk, his graying mustache twitching as he recognized Xavier. "Thornton," he acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to town? Thought you were busy with the spring calving." "Just finished," Xavier replied, guiding Victoria forward. "Got something more pressing to report. Miss Porter here was nearly abducted right on Main Street. Man had a gun to her head, forcing her into a wagon." Sheriff Wilkins stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Miss Porter, are you all right?" Victoria nodded, though she still felt unsteady. "Mr. Thornton intervened before the man could, before he could take me, shot the gun right out of his hand." The sheriff's eyebrows rose as he looked at Xavier. "Clean shot, clean enough," Xavier confirmed. "Didn't want to kill the man without knowing the full story, but couldn't let him take Miss Porter either." "And the wagon?" Sheriff Wilkins asked, reaching for his hat. "Circled R brand," Xavier replied grimly. The sheriff's expression darkened. "Riker's been getting bolder, but this—" He shook his head. "Did you recognize the man, Miss Porter?" "No, but he was tall with a scar across his left cheek," Victoria recalled. "And he was missing 2 fingers on his right hand." "Sounds like Jasper Hodge, one of Riker's hired guns," Sheriff Wilkins muttered. "But abducting women in broad daylight, that's a new low, even for Riker's crew." "The question is why," Xavier said, his voice hard. "Miss Porter, have you had any dealings with Emmett Riker?" Victoria shook her head. "None. I don't believe I've even met the man." "Well, he's not the type to have women snatched without a reason," Sheriff Wilkins said, strapping on his gun belt. "I'll ride out to the Circled R tomorrow, have a word with Riker himself." "I'd advise against going alone," Xavier warned. "If Riker's ordered something like this, he won't take kindly to questions." The sheriff grimaced. "My deputy's down with a fever, won't be back on his feet for days yet." "I'll go with you," Xavier offered, then glanced at Victoria. "But first, Miss Porter needs an escort home. After what happened today, I don't think she should be walking alone." Victoria wanted to protest that she could take care of herself, but the memory of the cold metal pressed against her temple was still too fresh. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Thornton. My shop is just down the street with living quarters upstairs." "I know it," Xavier nodded. "Porter's fine millinery." "Meet me here at dawn tomorrow, Thornton," Sheriff Wilkins said. "We'll ride out to the Circled R together." As they left the sheriff's office, the sun was setting in earnest, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The streets of Wilcox were growing quieter as businesses closed for the evening and townsfolk headed home for supper. "You must be hungry," Victoria said suddenly, realizing that her own fear had temporarily banished her appetite, but now it was returning. Would you care to join me for supper? It's the least I can do to thank you." Xavier looked surprised by the invitation, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Porter. I accept." They walked the short distance to her shop in comfortable silence. Victoria unlocked the door, then led the way through the shop, a tidy space with shelves of ribbons, feathers, and fabric samples, along with several displayed hats in the latest fashions, to a staircase at the back. "My living quarters are upstairs," she explained, suddenly self-conscious about inviting a man she just met into her home. But after what he'd done for her, it seemed ungrateful not to offer some hospitality. The upstairs apartment was small but cozy, with a kitchen and dining area, a modest parlor, and doors that presumably led to a bedroom and washroom. The furnishings were simple but of good quality, and there were touches of elegance in the lace curtains and the collection of porcelain figurines on a shelf. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Victoria said, gesturing to the table as she removed her bonnet and gloves. "I'm afraid I don't have anything fancy prepared, but there's a pot of stew I made this morning and fresh bread." "Sounds like a feast to me," Xavier said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. His dark hair was slightly flattened from the hat, giving him a more approachable appearance than the intimidating figure he'd cut earlier. As Victoria bustled about the kitchen, reheating the stew and slicing bread, she found herself stealing glances at her guest. He sat at her table with an easy confidence, his eyes taking in the details of her home without being intrusive. "Have you lived in Wilcox long, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, setting bowls and spoons on the table. "Call me Xavier, please," he replied. "Or Zav, and yes, about 8 years now. Came out from Texas with not much more than my horse and saddle. Worked as a ranch hand, then foreman. Saved enough to buy my own spread about 3 years ago." "That's impressive," Victoria said sincerely. "Building something from nothing takes determination." "The diamond T is modest compared to outfits like the circled R," Xavier said, referring to his ranch by its brand. "But it's mine, free and clear. 20 hands during roundup season, 10 regular. 1,000 head of cattle, good water rights. I'm satisfied." Victoria ladled the fragrant stew into bowls, then brought them to the table along with the bread and a small crock of butter. "It sounds wonderful. I've never been on a cattle ranch before." "What brought you all the way from Boston?" Xavier asked as she sat down across from him. "Besides inheriting the shop, I mean. That's a long journey for a lady on her own." Victoria hesitated, breaking off a piece of bread. "There wasn't much left for me in Boston. My parents died in a fire 5 years ago. I was working as a companion to an elderly widow, but when she passed last winter, well, Aunt Beatrice's letter about the shop seemed like providence." "I'm sorry about your folks," Xavier said quietly. "It's not easy losing family." "No, it isn't," Victoria agreed, noting something in his tone that suggested personal experience. "Did you leave family behind in Texas?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, lost my parents to cholera when I was 16. My younger brother died in the war. I was the only one left, so I headed west. Needed a fresh start." They ate in silence for a moment, both reflecting on losses that had shaped their paths. Victoria found herself studying Xavier's hands, strong and calloused from ranch work, but deft in their movements. Hands that had saved her life today. "This is excellent stew," Xavier complimented, breaking the somber mood. "You're a fine cook, Miss Porter." "Victoria, please," she responded with a small smile. "And thank you. Cooking was one of the few useful skills my finishing school education provided." "What else did they teach you at this finishing school?" Xavier asked, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "How to pour tea without spilling a drop, how to address a duke versus an earl, and how to politely decline a gentleman's advances without causing offense," Victoria replied, surprising herself with her candor. "Nothing particularly useful for life in the Arizona territory." Xavier chuckled, a warm sound that transformed his face. "I don't know about that. Proper tea pouring seems mighty important." Victoria laughed, the tension of the day finally beginning to ease. "I'll have you know I haven't spilled a drop since I was 12 years old." "A valuable skill indeed," Xavier said, his eyes twinkling. Then his expression grew more serious. "Victoria, about what happened today, I can't help but wonder why Riker would target you specifically." Victoria sobered, setting down her spoon. "I've been wondering the same thing. I've had no dealings with the man, though I've heard his name mentioned in town. Riker's not known for random violence, Xavier explained. Everything he does has a purpose, usually tied to expanding his holdings or eliminating competition. But I'm just a milliner, Victoria protested. How could I possibly threaten his interests? Xavier frowned thoughtfully. Your aunt, did she leave you anything besides the shop? Land, perhaps? Mining rights? Victoria considered this. The shop, the building it's in, and a small parcel of land on the outskirts of town. Nothing valuable as far as I know. Just a few acres with an old cabin that my aunt used as a weekend retreat. I haven't even visited it yet. Where exactly is this land? Xavier asked, his interest clearly piqued. North of town, I believe. Along Sweetwater Creek, according to the deed. Victoria stood and went to a small secretary desk in the corner, retrieving a folded document. Here it is. Xavier took the deed, studying it carefully. His expression darkened as he read. Victoria, this land borders Riker's property. In fact, it contains the headwaters of Sweetwater Creek, the main water source for the northern part of his ranch. Victoria frowned, taking the deed back. But surely that doesn't give him the right to abduct me. Of course not, Xavier agreed grimly. But it gives him a motive. Water rights are more valuable than gold out here, especially in drought years. If Riker could force you to sell that land. I would never sell under such circumstances, Victoria declared firmly. No, I don't imagine you would, Xavier said with a hint of admiration. Which is why he might have decided to remove you entirely. Victoria paled at the implications. What am I supposed to do now? I can't just leave this shop as my livelihood, my home. First thing tomorrow, Sheriff Wilkins and I will have a word with Riker, Xavier assured her. Make it clear that his actions haven't gone unnoticed. And if that doesn't work, Victoria asked quietly. Xavier didn't immediately answer, instead finishing his stew thoughtfully. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For tonight, though, I don't think you should stay here alone. Victoria's eyes widened. Mr. Thornton, I'm not suggesting anything improper, he quickly clarified. But if Riker wants you gone badly enough to try once, he might try again. I could sleep downstairs in the shop, just to make sure no one troubles you. Victoria hesitated. The thought of spending the night alone after what had happened was unsettling, but having a man she barely knew stay in her shop posed its own concerns. What will people say? She wondered aloud. I'm still establishing myself in this community. They'll say you're a sensible woman who values her safety, Xavier replied pragmatically. But if you're concerned, perhaps Mrs. Hollister from the boarding house would be willing to stay with you instead. Victoria considered this, then shook her head. No, Mrs. Hollister has 5 boarders to look after and she's getting on in years. I can't ask her to leave them. She straightened her shoulders. I accept your offer, Mr. Thornton, Xavier, and I thank you for it. Xavier nodded, clearly pleased by her decision. I'll fetch my bedroll from my horse. Won't be the first time I've slept on a shop floor. After supper, Victoria brought down blankets and a pillow for Xavier, feeling oddly domestic as she helped him make a pallet behind the counter of the shop. She'd secured all the doors and windows, drawn the curtains, and even placed a chair under the doorknob of the back entrance, a precaution Xavier suggested. I'm just upstairs if you need anything, she told him, lingering by the stairs. And thank you again for everything today. Just doing what any decent man would, Xavier replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true in the wild country of the Arizona Territory. Nevertheless, I'm grateful, Victoria said softly. Good night, Xavier. Good night, Victoria, he responded, his deep voice following her as she ascended the stairs. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Victoria lay awake, replaying the day's events in her mind. The terror of the abduction attempt, the mysterious motive behind it, and most persistently, the man sleeping downstairs, a stranger who had saved her life and now guarded her shop. There was something about Xavier Thornton that intrigued her, beyond mere gratitude for his intervention. She finally drifted off in the small hours of the morning, only to be awakened by the smell of coffee and the sound of movement downstairs. Hastily donning a robe over her nightgown, Victoria descended to find Xavier stoking the small stove in the back room of her shop, a pot of coffee already brewing. "Hope you don't mind," he said, straightening as she entered. "Figured you could use some coffee after yesterday's excitement." "That was thoughtful of you," Victoria replied, surprised by the gesture. She noticed he'd already rolled up his bedding and stored it neatly in the corner. "Have you been up long?" "Since dawn," Xavier confirmed. "Force of habit from ranch life. I need to meet Sheriff Wilkins soon." He poured coffee into 2 cups, offering one to Victoria. "Did you sleep all right?" "Eventually," she admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. "What time is it now?" "Just past 6, Xavier replied. "Most of the town's still asleep." "Will you come back?" Victoria asked impulsively. "After you speak with Riker, I mean. I'd like to know what he says." Xavier nodded. "I'll come straight here. Should be back by early afternoon unless there's trouble." Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety. "Do you expect trouble?" "With Emmett Riker." "Always," Xavier said grimly. "But 2 armed men riding up in broad daylight isn't the same as facing one of his thugs in a back alley. Even Riker respects the badge to a point." "Please be careful," Victoria said, surprising herself with her concern for this man she barely knew. Xavier's expression softened. "I will. And you stay inside the shop today. Keep the doors locked. Mrs. Hollister across the street keeps a shotgun behind her counter. Might be worth letting her know to keep an eye out." "I will," Victoria promised. After a quick breakfast of coffee and leftover bread, Xavier prepared to leave. At the door, he turned back to Victoria, his expression serious. "If I'm not back by sundown, go to Judge Freeman's house. His wife will take you in, and the judge has enough influence to keep Riker at bay temporarily." Victoria nodded, her throat suddenly tight with worry. "I'll remember." Xavier hesitated, then reached out and briefly squeezed her hand, a gesture both reassuring and surprisingly intimate. "You're made of sterner stuff than most, Victoria Porter. You'll be all right." With that, he was gone, striding down the still quiet street toward the sheriff's office. Victoria watched from the window until he disappeared from view, then set about preparing her shop for the day, though her thoughts remained far away, riding north with Xavier Thornton toward an uncertain confrontation. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. Victoria had few customers, and those who did come in were clearly more interested in gossip about her near abduction than in purchasing hats. She maintained a polite facade, neither confirming nor denying the wilder rumors, simply stating that Mr. Thornton had intervened in an unfortunate situation, and she was most grateful. By noon, Victoria's nerves were stretched thin. She jumped at every sound, peering anxiously through the window at each passing rider. She'd taken Xavier's advice and spoken with Mrs. Hollister, the stern widow who ran the boarding house across the street. The older woman had been horrified by Victoria's story and promised to keep her shotgun close at hand. "Never did trust Emmett Riker," Mrs. Hollister had declared. "Man's got the morals of an alley cat and twice the claws. You did right to accept Mr. Thornton's help, dear. He's a good man, for all his rough edges." Now, as the afternoon sun climbed high, Victoria found herself wondering about those rough edges. Xavier Thornton was clearly respected in Wilcox, but there was something in his demeanor, a watchfulness, a readiness for trouble that suggested he'd seen his share of violence. Not a dangerous man, precisely, but a man accustomed to danger. The bell above the shop door jangled, startling Victoria from her thoughts. She looked up, expecting another curious townswoman, but instead found herself facing a tall, elegantly dressed man she didn't recognize. Something about his cold eyes and the way he scanned the shop made her instantly wary. "Good afternoon," she greeted him, keeping the counter between them. "May I help you? Miss Porter, I presume?" The man removed his hat, revealing silver-streaked dark hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness around his mouth. "Emmett Riker." "I believe we have business to discuss." Victoria's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mr. Riker, I was under the impression Sheriff Wilkins and Mr. Thornton were speaking with you today." A cold smile touched Riker's lips. "They paid me a visit, yes. Made some rather serious accusations. I thought it best to address the matter directly with you." "I see," Victoria said cautiously. "Where are Sheriff Wilkins and Mr. Thornton now?" "Still at my ranch, I expect, enjoying my hospitality," Riker replied smoothly, though something in his tone made Victoria doubt the truth of his words. "The sheriff was particularly interested in examining my wagon barn." Victoria maintained her composure with effort. "And what business did you wish to discuss, Mr. Riker?" Riker casually examined a hat displayed on a nearby stand. "Fine work," he commented. "Your aunt had talented hands, a shame about her passing." He looked up, his eyes cold and calculating. "I understand you inherited a piece of property along with this shop, a small parcel north of town." "I did," Victoria confirmed, seeing no point in denial. "I'd like to purchase it," Riker said directly. "I'm prepared to offer a generous sum far more than its market value, $500. Victoria raised her eyebrows. "That is generous. May I ask why you're interested in a few acres with an old cabin?" "It adjoins my property," Riker said with a shrug. "I like keeping my borders clean. No disputes, no misunderstandings." "I see," Victoria said, beginning to understand Xavier's concerns. "And if I'm not interested in selling?" Riker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a price, Miss Porter. $750 then. More than enough to expand this charming shop of yours, perhaps hire an assistant." "Mr. Riker," Victoria said carefully, "I appreciate your offer, but I'm not ready to sell the property. I haven't even had a chance to see it yet." Riker's expression hardened. "I strongly advise you to reconsider. $1,000 cash, my final offer." Victoria felt a chill despite the warm day. There was no mistaking the threat underlying his words. "As I said, I'm not interested in selling at this time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have inventory to attend to." Riker replaced his hat, his movements deliberate. "You're making a mistake, Miss Porter. This territory isn't kind to those who don't understand the way things work." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Riker?" Victoria asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Merely offering friendly advice," Riker replied. "Think on my offer. I won't make it again." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Miss Porter, I wouldn't place too much faith in Xavier Thornton's protection. He has his own problems to worry about." With that ominous statement hanging in the air, Riker departed, leaving Victoria trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. His visit confirmed everything Xavier had suspected. The land was valuable to Riker, valuable enough that he'd resort to intimidation or worse to obtain it. More worrying was his cryptic comment about Xavier. What had happened at the Circled R ranch? Were Xavier and the sheriff in danger? Victoria paced her shop anxiously, debating whether to seek help from Judge Freeman immediately or wait as Xavier had instructed. Her decision was made for her when, an hour later, the shop bell jangled again and Sheriff Wilkins entered, looking grim but unharmed. "Sheriff," Victoria exclaimed. "What happened?" "Mr. Riker was here, I know," Wilkins interrupted. "Passed him on the road back to town. He didn't waste any time, did he?" The sheriff removed his hat, revealing a nasty bruise forming at his temple. "We had a less than friendly reception at the Circled R." Victoria's heart sank. "Where's Xavier? Is he all right?" Sheriff Wilkins's expression grew even grimmer. "That's why I'm here, Miss Porter. Thornton took a bullet. He's alive, but in bad shape. Doc Sullivan's tending to him now." Victoria felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. "A bullet? Riker shot him." "Not Riker himself, he's too smart for that. One of his men claimed it was an accident, said he thought we were rustlers." The sheriff's disgust was evident. "We both know it was no accident, but proving it is another matter." "I must go to him," Victoria said decisively, already reaching for her shawl. Sheriff Wilkins nodded, unsurprised by her reaction. "I thought you might feel that way. That's why I came straight here. Doc's place is 3 doors down from the bank. I'll escort you." They walked quickly through town, Victoria barely noticing the curious stares that followed them. Her mind was filled with worry for Xavier, this man who had come to her rescue, who had faced danger on her behalf, and now lay wounded because of it. Dr. Sullivan's office was a tidy whitewashed building with a small sign announcing his practice. Inside, a narrow hallway led to several rooms, one of which had its door ajar. The sheriff led Victoria to this room, where the doctor, a balding man with spectacles, was bending over a bed. On the bed lay Xavier, his face alarmingly pale against the white sheets, his shirt removed and a bloody bandage wrapped around his left shoulder. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "How is he, Doc?" Sheriff Wilkins asked quietly. Dr. Sullivan straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Bullet went clean through, which is fortunate. No major vessels hit, but he's lost a good amount of blood. Fever's the main concern now." Victoria moved to the bedside, her heart constricting at the sight of Xavier's weakened state. "Will he recover?" "Good chance of it," the doctor replied, studying her with interest. "He's strong and the wound itself isn't fatal, but he'll need careful nursing for a few days." He glanced at the sheriff. "I was going to ask Mrs. Hollister to spare one of her girls to sit with him, but I'll do it," Victoria interrupted firmly. "I'll stay with him." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "Miss Porter, it's hardly proper for an unmarried lady to propriety be damned," Victoria said, surprising herself with her vehemence. "This man took a bullet because he tried to help me. I won't leave him to the care of strangers." Sheriff Wilkins coughed to hide what might have been a smile. "I reckon Miss Porter's made up her mind, Doc, and given the circumstances, I don't think even the most gossipy folks in town could object." Dr. Sullivan sighed. "Very well. He needs someone to monitor his fever, keep the wound clean, and make sure he drinks plenty of water when he wakes. Can you manage that, Miss Porter?" "I can," Victoria said confidently, though she'd never nursed a gunshot wound before. "I'll check in regularly," the doctor promised. "And you'll send for me immediately if his fever spikes or the wound shows any signs of infection, redness, swelling, or unusual discharge." Victoria nodded, already pulling a chair closer to the bed. "I understand." Sheriff Wilkins and the doctor exchanged a glance, then left the room, closing the door partway to give some privacy while maintaining propriety. Victoria sat beside Xavier, gently taking his hand in hers. It was warm, too warm, suggesting the beginnings of fever. "Xavier," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her, "I'm here. You're going to be all right." For hours, Victoria maintained her vigil. She bathed Xavier's forehead with cool water when his fever rose, carefully cleaned around his bandaged wound, and moistened his lips when they became parched. Dr. Sullivan returned twice to check on his patient, nodding approvingly at Victoria's attentive care. As evening approached, Xavier stirred, his eyelids fluttering. Victoria leaned forward anxiously, still holding his hand. "Xavier, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found her face. "Victoria," he murmured, his voice rough, "you're all right." The fact that his first concern was for her safety, even in his weakened state, touched Victoria deeply. "I'm fine," she assured him. "It's you we're worried about." Xavier tried to sit up, then grimaced in pain. "Riker's man shot me from behind, coward's way." "Lie still," Victoria urged, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "The doctor says you'll recover, but you need rest." "Riker will try again," Xavier warned, his eyes intense despite his pallor. "Your land, water rights, too valuable." "He already came to see me," Victoria admitted. "Offered to buy the property." Alarm flashed across Xavier's face. "What did you tell him?" "That I wasn't interested in selling," Victoria replied. "He didn't take it well." Xavier closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tight. "You're in danger. He won't stop." "Neither will I," Victoria said with quiet determination. "This is my home now, Xavier, my life. I won't be bullied into giving it up." A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "Stubborn woman." "Says the man who took a bullet for a stranger," Victoria countered, relieved to see some of his spirit returning. "Not a stranger," Xavier murmured, his eyes beginning to drift closed again as exhaustion claimed him. "Not anymore." Victoria continued her nursing through the night, dozing occasionally in the chair but waking at Xavier's slightest movement. By morning, his fever had risen worryingly, and Victoria sent for Dr. Sullivan, who arrived promptly. "It's to be expected," the doctor reassured her after examining Xavier. "The body fighting infection. Keep up with the cool compresses and make sure he drinks this when he wakes." He handed Victoria a bottle of dark liquid, willow bark extract. "It will help with the fever and pain." The day passed in a blur of anxiety and small nursing tasks. Victoria left Xavier's side only briefly. When Mrs. Hollister came to sit with him while Victoria returned to her shop to collect some personal items and post a note on the door explaining the temporary closure. When she returned to the doctor's office, she found Xavier awake and arguing with Mrs. Hollister about getting out of bed. "You won't do Miss Porter any good by tearing open that wound and bleeding all over the doctor's floor," Mrs. Hollister was saying sternly as Victoria entered. "She's right," Victoria agreed, setting down her small bag of belongings. "Though I appreciate the sentiment behind your stubbornness, Xavier." Xavier subsided against the pillows, though his expression remained frustrated. "I don't like leaving you unprotected when Riker's made his intentions clear." "I'm hardly unprotected," Victoria pointed out. "The entire town knows what happened now. Sheriff Wilkins has deputies watching my shop, and Judge Freeman has offered his home as sanctuary if needed." "Riker doesn't care about deputies or judges," Xavier insisted. "He's been running roughshod over this county for years. The only thing he respects is force." Mrs. Hollister cleared her throat pointedly. "Perhaps this conversation can wait until Mr. Thornton is stronger. Miss Porter, I've brought you some supper from my kitchen. You need to keep up your strength, too." Victoria thanked the older woman, who departed with a knowing look between the two of them that made Victoria blush slightly. Once they were alone, Xavier fixed Victoria with a serious gaze. "Victoria, listen to me. When I'm well enough to travel, I want you to come to my ranch. The Diamond T is well defended and Riker wouldn't dare attack it openly." "Leave Wilcox," Victoria frowned. "But my shop, my livelihood, just temporarily," Xavier clarified. "Until we can resolve this situation with Riker." Victoria considered his offer, touched by his concern. I appreciate the thought, Xavier, truly. But fleeing would only convince Riker that his intimidation works. Besides, I've only just begun to establish myself here. Xavier studied her face, then sighed. You're determined to stand your ground. Yes, Victoria confirmed. As determined as you were to protect a woman you'd never met from being abducted. A reluctant smile tugged at Xavier's mouth. Tâchez, Miss Porter. Over the next 3 days, Xavier's condition improved steadily. The fever broke. The wound began to heal cleanly, and his strength gradually returned. Victoria remained his primary nurse, though she allowed herself more frequent breaks as his health improved. During those long hours together, they really talked in a way Victoria had never experienced with a man before. Xavier told her about his ranch, his dreams of expanding it into one of the finest cattle operations in the territory. Victoria shared stories of her life in Boston, her struggle to find purpose after her parents' deaths, and her growing love for the rugged beauty of Arizona. I thought I'd miss the city more, she admitted on the 3rd evening as they shared a simple supper. Dr. Sullivan had allowed Xavier to eat sitting up in bed. The theaters, the libraries, the society, but there's something about this place, the openness, the honesty of it. Even with men like Riker, at least the danger is straightforward. Xavier nodded in understanding. The West strips away pretenses. A man or woman is judged by their actions, not their pedigree or bank account. Precisely, Victoria agreed, pleased that he understood. Though I confess, I do miss having more than one dressmaker to choose from. Xavier chuckled, the sound warming Victoria in unexpected ways. Give it time. Wilcox is growing. Another year or two you might have all the dressmakers you can handle. If I'm still here, Victoria said thoughtfully, if Riker doesn't drive me out first. Xavier's expression hardened. He won't, I promise you that. There was such conviction in his voice that Victoria found herself believing him, despite the odds against them. You've done so much for me already, Xavier, more than I had any right to expect from someone who was a stranger just days ago. Doesn't feel like days, Xavier said quietly, his eyes holding hers. Feels like I've known you much longer. Victoria felt a flutter in her chest at his words and the intensity of his gaze. I feel the same way, she admitted softly. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Dr. Sullivan entered, nodding approvingly as he saw Xavier sitting up. Making good progress, I see. How's the pain? Manageable, Xavier replied, though Victoria had noticed him wincing when he thought she wasn't looking. The doctor checked the wound, changing the bandage and applying a fresh poultice. You're healing well. Another day or 2 of rest, and you can return to your own lodgings, though no riding or heavy work for at least 2 weeks. Xavier frowned at this news. I need to get back to my ranch. My foreman's capable, but spring's a busy time. Your ranch will survive without you a bit longer, Dr. Sullivan said firmly. Your body needs time to heal, unless you want to risk tearing that wound open again. After the doctor left, Xavier turned to Victoria with a determined expression. I have a proposition for you. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Should I be concerned? A smile flickered across Xavier's face. Nothing improper, I assure you. I was thinking if I can't return to my ranch immediately and you're in potential danger at your shop, perhaps we could help each other. Go on, Victoria encouraged, intrigued. Come stay at my house in town, Xavier suggested. It's small but comfortable, and I rarely use it except during cattle sales or bad weather. You'd be safer there than at your shop, fewer windows, sturdier doors, and less obvious a target for Riker. And you? Victoria asked, sensing there was more to his proposition. I'd stay there too, Xavier admitted. In separate rooms, of course, he added hastily. But that way I could continue recovering while ensuring your safety. 2 birds with 1 stone. Victoria considered the idea. It was unconventional, certainly, and would set tongues wagging throughout Wilcox. But after nursing Xavier for days, propriety seemed a secondary concern compared to their safety. "What about my shop?" she asked practically. "You could open it during daylight hours with Sheriff Wilkins or one of his deputies keeping watch," Xavier suggested. "Then return to the house before dusk." Victoria nodded slowly. "It could work, but won't people talk?" Xavier's expression was wry. "They're already talking, Victoria. You've spent 3 days and nights at my bedside. In a small town like this, that's practically an engagement announcement." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. "I hadn't thought of it that way." "Does it bother you?" Xavier asked, his voice suddenly serious. "What people might think about us?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither had openly acknowledged until now. Victoria considered it carefully, examining her own feelings. "No," she finally said with quiet certainty. "It doesn't bother me. Does it bother you?" Xavier's eyes softened as they held hers. "Not in the slightest." The next afternoon, Dr. Sullivan reluctantly agreed to release Xavier from his care, with strict instructions about rest and changing bandages. Sheriff Wilkins arrived to escort them to Xavier's house, a modest but well-built structure on the western edge of town, set back from the road with a small stable behind it. "It's not much," Xavier said apologetically as they entered. The house was simply furnished but clean, with a parlor, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. "I'm rarely here, so I never bothered with many comforts." "It's perfect," Victoria assured him, setting down her bag in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. "And much safer than my shop, I admit." Sheriff Wilkins helped settle Xavier in the larger bedroom, then tipped his hat to them both. "I'll have a deputy check in regularly. And Miss Porter, I've arranged for young Tommy Wilson to stand guard at your shop during business hours, if you decide to open tomorrow." "Thank you, Sheriff," Victoria said gratefully. "I do plan to open. I can't afford to lose too many days of business." After the sheriff departed, Victoria prepared a simple supper from the supplies Mrs. Hollister had thoughtfully provided. She and Xavier ate together in the parlor, Xavier propped up with pillows on the small sofa. "This is strange," Victoria commented as she poured tea for them both. "A week ago, I was alone in a new town, trying to establish myself as a respectable businesswoman. Now I'm living under the same roof as a man I barely know, hiding from a powerful rancher who seems determined to run me out of town." "When you put it that way, it does sound rather dramatic," Xavier agreed with a small smile. "Like something out of a dime novel." Victoria laughed softly. "Except in those stories, the hero doesn't usually get shot quite so early in the tale." "Perhaps I'm not the hero of this story," Xavier suggested, his eyes twinkling. "Perhaps you are. Me," Victoria scoffed. "I'm just a milliner from Boston." "A milliner from Boston who refused to be intimidated by one of the most powerful men in the territory," Xavier countered. "Who's standing her ground despite the danger. Sounds rather heroic to me." Victoria felt a pleasant warmth at his words. "Well, when you put it that way." Their evening passed companionably, with Xavier teaching Victoria how to play poker using matchsticks instead of money. Victoria proved to have a natural talent for the game, much to Xavier's chagrin. "You're sure you've never played before?" he asked suspiciously as she won her 3rd hand in a row. "Never," Victoria confirmed with an innocent smile. "Though I did spend a great deal of time observing gentlemen at social gatherings in Boston. It's amazing what one can learn by watching." "Remind me never to play you for actual money," Xavier grumbled good-naturedly. As the evening grew late, Victoria helped Xavier to his bedroom, conscious of his still weakened state. At the door, they paused, suddenly awkward in the intimate setting. Thank you, Xavier said quietly. Not just for the nursing, but for trusting me, coming here. I know it wasn't an easy decision. Actually, it was, Victoria admitted. Easy, I mean. I trust you, Xavier. I can't explain why exactly, but I do. Xavier reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending a shiver through Victoria. I trust you too, Victoria Porter, more than I've trusted anyone in a long time. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Victoria felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. We should get some rest, Xavier finally said, his voice husky. Tomorrow will be challenging enough. Yes, Victoria agreed, stepping back reluctantly. Good night, Xavier. Good night, Victoria. In her small bedroom, Victoria changed into her nightgown and brushed out her hair, her mind full of conflicting emotions. There was fear, certainly fear of Riker and what he might do next. But there was also a growing feeling she couldn't deny, an attraction to Xavier Thornton that went beyond gratitude for his protection. It was madness, she told herself. They barely knew each other. And yet in these few days of crisis, they had shared more of themselves than many couples did in years of courtship. There was an honesty between them, a connection Victoria had never experienced before. Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams filled with images of Xavier strong and protective, wounded and vulnerable, his eyes holding hers with that intensity that made her heart race. The next morning, Xavier insisted on accompanying Victoria to her shop, despite the doctor's orders to rest. You can hardly walk without pain, Victoria protested as he struggled to saddle a horse for them to ride double. I can manage, Xavier insisted stubbornly. I'm not letting you go alone. In the end, they compromised. Sheriff Wilkins provided a buggy and drove them himself to the millinery shop. Tommy Wilson, a gangly youth with a deputy's badge pinned proudly to his chest, was already waiting outside the door. Morning, Miss Porter, Mr. Thornton. The boy greeted them enthusiastically. Sheriff's ordered me to stay right here all day. Nobody's gonna bother you while Tommy Wilson's on duty. Xavier exchanged an amused glance with Victoria. The boy couldn't be more than 16, but his earnestness was endearing. We appreciate your service, Deputy Wilson, Victoria said gravely, making the boy stand a little taller. The day passed uneventfully. Victoria had several customers, all of whom expressed concern about her recent troubles and admiration for her courage. To her surprise, business was actually better than usual. It seemed her confrontation with Riker had earned her a measure of respect in the community. Xavier rested on a chair near the back of the shop, insisting on staying despite Victoria's protests that he should return to the house. By mid-afternoon, however, it was clear that his strength was failing, his face pale with pain and fatigue. You're going home, Victoria declared firmly after the last customer had left. No arguments. Xavier opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, recognizing the determination in her voice. Yes, madam. Sheriff Wilkins returned with the buggy at Victoria's request, helping Xavier into the seat. No sign of Riker or his men in town today, the sheriff reported as they drove. But that doesn't mean he's given up. No, Xavier agreed grimly. He's planning something. Riker doesn't take defiance well. That evening, after helping Xavier change his bandage, a task that required all of Victoria's composure given the intimacy of touching his bare chest, they sat in the parlor discussing their limited options. If only we knew what makes your land so valuable to Riker, Xavier mused. Besides the water rights, I mean, there must be something more, Victoria frowned thoughtfully. I wish I'd had a chance to see the property. The deed mentions a cabin, but I know nothing about the land itself. We could ride out there, Xavier suggested. Once I'm stronger. That could be weeks, Victoria pointed out, and Riker may act before then. Xavier's expression was determined. Then we need to find another way to investigate, someone who could go in our place, someone Riker wouldn't suspect. But who? Victoria wondered. Their discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Xavier immediately reached for the revolver he kept nearby, nodding for Victoria to stand aside as he approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" he called. "Judge Freeman and wife," came the reply. "Just checking on you folks." Xavier relaxed slightly, opening the door to admit the elderly judge and his plump, kindly-looking wife. Mrs. Freeman immediately bustled over to Victoria, clasping her hands warmly. "My dear, we've been so worried about you. Such terrible business with Riker. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, thank you," Victoria replied, touched by the woman's genuine concern. Judge Freeman, meanwhile, was eyeing Xavier critically. "You look like you should be in bed, Thornton, not playing guardian." "I'll rest when Riker's no longer a threat," Xavier replied stubbornly. The judge harumphed, but there was respect in his eyes. "Stubborn as always. Well, that's why I'm here, actually. Got some information you might find interesting." They all sat down, Mrs. Freeman insisting on making tea while the judge shared his news. "Been doing some digging into those land records," Freeman explained. "That property of yours, Miss Porter, it's more significant than you might realize. There's been a survey done recently, commissioned by the territorial government. They're planning a railway spur from the main line, and one of the proposed routes crosses directly through your land." Victoria exchanged a startled look with Xavier. "A railway? But what would that have to do with Riker?" "Everything," Xavier said grimly. "If the railway goes through your land, it would transform the region. Cattle could be shipped directly from there without the long drive to the main line. Whoever controls that land would have a tremendous advantage." Judge Freeman nodded. "Exactly. And there's more. The survey also noted indicators of silver deposits on the northern edge of your property, nothing confirmed yet, but enough to interest speculators." "So that's why Riker wants my land," Victoria breathed, the pieces falling into place. "Water rights, potential silver, and a railway connection, it would make him the most powerful man in the county." "He probably knew about the survey before it was officially filed," Xavier added. "Riker has friends in the territorial offices. When your aunt died and the property passed to you, he saw his chance to acquire it before the information became public." "But why not simply make me a fair offer?" Victoria wondered. "Why resort to abduction and intimidation?" "Because Riker doesn't operate that way," Judge Freeman said flatly. "He takes what he wants by whatever means necessary. It's how he built his empire." Mrs. Freeman returned with the tea, tutting sympathetically. "Such a dreadful man, but you must be careful, my dear. Men like Riker don't stop until they get what they want." "Or until someone stops them," Xavier said quietly, his expression hardening. After the Freemans departed, Victoria and Xavier discussed this new information, weighing their options. "If the railway and silver deposits are confirmed, my land would be worth a fortune," Victoria mused. "Much more than Riker offered." "Which means he'll be even more determined to get it one way or another," Xavier pointed out. "We need to act before he does." "But how?" Victoria asked. "We can't fight him directly. He has too many men, too much influence." Xavier was silent for a long moment, thinking. "There might be a way," he finally said. "Not to fight him exactly, but to outmaneuver him, but it would require—" "Well, it would require a significant commitment on your part." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "What kind of commitment?" Xavier seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "It's just an idea and perhaps a foolish one, but if we were to. That is, if you and I were to." "Yes," Victoria prompted, intrigued by his unusual awkwardness. Xavier took a deep breath. If we were to marry, our properties would be legally joined. The Diamond T is well established with strong legal protections. Riker couldn't move against your land without challenging my entire ranch. Victoria stared at him, stunned by the suggestion. Marry? But we've only known each other a week. I know, Xavier said quickly. It's an outrageous suggestion. Forget I mentioned it. But Victoria couldn't forget it. The idea, shocking as it was, had a certain practical logic. And more than that, if she was honest with herself, the thought of marrying Xavier Thornton wasn't as alarming as it should have been. It would be a marriage of convenience, she said slowly, testing the concept, for protection against Riker. Xavier's eyes held hers steadily. It would start that way, yes. The implication that it might become something more hung in the air between them. Victoria felt her heart beating faster as she considered the possibility. I would never pressure you, Xavier continued when she remained silent. We could maintain separate households if you preferred, once the danger had passed. Your shop would remain yours entirely. And your ranch would remain yours, Victoria added, thinking practically. Xavier nodded. Though legally, we would each have claim to the other's property. That's the point, to create a legal shield Riker couldn't easily penetrate. Victoria stood up, needing to move as her thoughts raced. It's a drastic solution. These are drastic circumstances, Xavier pointed out, but if the idea is too uncomfortable, we can find another way. Victoria turned to face him, studying his expression. There was concern there, and something else, something warmer that made her breath catch. Why did you really suggest this, Xavier? She asked softly. Is it only about protecting my land from Riker? Xavier held her gaze, and in that moment, all pretense fell away. No, he admitted quietly. It's not only about that. I care for you, Victoria. More than I should, perhaps, given how brief our acquaintance has been. But I can't deny what I feel. Victoria's heart soared at his words, confirming what she had begun to suspect, that the connection between them was more than circumstantial, more than gratitude or convenience. I care for you too, she whispered, the admission both frightening and liberating. Though it seems impossible after such a short time. Xavier rose carefully, mindful of his wound, and approached her. Perhaps some connections don't require time to form. Perhaps they simply exist, waiting to be discovered. He reached for her hand, holding it gently between both of his. I'm not asking for your answer now. It's too important a decision to make hastily. Think about it, please. Victoria nodded, her thoughts whirling. I will. That night, sleep eluded Victoria entirely. She lay awake, considering Xavier's proposal from every angle. It was madness, of course, marrying a man she'd known for a week, no matter how strong their connection seemed. And yet, hadn't her life already changed irrevocably the moment Xavier's shot had saved her from abduction? Wasn't she already bound to him by circumstances neither of them had chosen? More importantly, could she envision a life with Xavier Thornton not just as a legal protection against Riker, but as a true partnership? The answer, she realized with some surprise, was yes. Despite their brief acquaintance, she trusted him implicitly. She admired his courage, his integrity, his quiet strength. And there was no denying the attraction between them, the spark that ignited whenever their eyes met. By morning, Victoria had made her decision. She found Xavier in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee one-handed, his other arm still limited by his injury. Let me help you with that, she offered, taking the coffee pot from him. Thank you, Xavier said, studying her face. You look like you didn't sleep much. I had a lot to think about, Victoria admitted, busying herself with the coffee preparation to avoid his gaze. About my proposal, Xavier guessed. Victoria nodded, gathering her courage. Yes, it's unconventional to say the least. I know, Xavier agreed quietly. Victoria finally turned to face him. But then, nothing about our situation is conventional, and perhaps that's not a bad thing. Xavier's expression grew intent. What are you saying, Victoria? I'm saying yes, she replied simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Xavier Thornton. Joy bloomed across Xavier's face, followed quickly by concern. You're certain? I don't want you to feel pressured by the circumstances. I'm certain, Victoria confirmed, surprising herself with the depth of her conviction. This began as a matter of protection, yes. But it's become something more, at least for me. For me as well, Xavier said fervently, stepping closer to her. Much more. He reached out, gently cupping her face with his good hand. I promise to be a good husband to you, Victoria, to protect you, respect you, and honor your independence. And perhaps in time, we'll discover what this connection between us truly means, Victoria finished for him, her heart full. Xavier smiled. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. Victoria responded, her arms circling his neck carefully to avoid his injured shoulder, amazed at how right it felt to be in his embrace. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. We should speak with Judge Freeman today. He can perform the ceremony as soon as possible. Yes, Victoria agreed. The sooner we're legally bound, the sooner your plan will work to protect my land. Xavier smiled wryly. Is that the only reason you're in a hurry? Victoria felt herself blush. Perhaps not the only reason. They decided that Victoria would open her shop as usual, while Xavier would visit Judge Freeman to arrange the wedding. Sheriff Wilkins, when informed of their plans, was surprised but supportive. Can't say I saw this coming quite so fast, the sheriff admitted. But it makes good sense, strategically speaking, and anyone with eyes can see there's more than strategy at work here. The wedding was arranged for the following day, a simple ceremony at Judge Freeman's home, with the sheriff and Mrs. Freeman as witnesses. Victoria spent the day in a state of nervous excitement, alternating between practical arrangements and moments of stunned disbelief at the turn her life had taken. That evening, as they sat together in Xavier's parlor, soon to be their parlor, planning the logistics of combining their households, a pounding at the door interrupted their conversation. Xavier immediately reached for his gun, but before he could move to the door, it burst open. 4 men entered, weapons drawn. Victoria recognized one of them as Jasper Hodge, the man who had tried to abduct her. "Evening, folks," Hodge drawled, his scarred face twisted in an ugly smile. "Boss wants a word with you." Behind him stood Emmett Riker, impeccably dressed as before, his cold eyes surveying the scene with satisfaction. "Miss Porter, Mr. Thornton, I apologize for the late hour, but I've run out of patience for more civilized approaches." Xavier had positioned himself between Victoria and the intruders, his injured arm limiting his options. "You're trespassing, Riker. Get out." Riker smiled thinly. "I don't think you're in a position to give orders, Thornton, not with 4 guns pointed at you. What do you want?" Victoria demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. "The same thing I wanted before your property," Riker replied. "Only now I'm not offering to buy it. Now I'm taking it." "You can't simply take someone's land," Victoria protested. "Can't I?" Riker raised an eyebrow. "People disappear in the territory all the time. Tragic accidents, hostile Indians, bandits. So many dangers for a newcomer unfamiliar with the harsh realities of the frontier." The threat was unmistakable. Victoria felt cold fear grip her heart, but she refused to show it. "You won't get away with this." "I already have, my dear," Riker said confidently. "Hodge, tie them up. "We're taking a little ride to Miss Porter's property. Time she saw it for herself one last time." Hodge and another man moved forward, rope in hand. Xavier tensed, clearly calculating whether he could reach his gun in time to take down at least one of them before being shot himself. "Don't," Victoria whispered to him, seeing his intention. "It's not worth your life." "Listen to the lady, Thornton," Riker advised. "She's smarter than you." With great reluctance, Xavier allowed himself to be bound, his injured shoulder making him wince as his arms were pulled behind his back. Victoria was similarly restrained, though less roughly. They were led outside to a waiting wagon, the same one Victoria had nearly been abducted in days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her as she was forced to climb into it, Xavier beside her. "Where are you taking us?" Xavier demanded as the wagon began to move, Riker riding alongside on a handsome black horse. "As I said, to Miss Porter's property," Riker replied. "It's about time she saw what she's been so stubbornly clinging to." They rode in tense silence for about an hour, heading north of town. Even in the moonlight, Victoria could see the landscape changing, becoming more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and stands of pine trees replacing the flat desert terrain near town. Finally, they came to a small clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood, its windows dark and its porch sagging. A small creek bubbled nearby, the water gleaming silver in the moonlight. "Here we are," Riker announced as the wagon stopped. "Sweetwater Cabin. Your inheritance, Miss Porter." Victoria took in the humble structure and the surrounding land, trying to see what made it so valuable beyond the water rights and the rumored silver deposits. There was a stark beauty to the place, with the mountains rising in the distance and the sound of the creek creating a peaceful backdrop. "Get them out," Riker ordered, dismounting from his horse. Hodge and another man roughly pulled Victoria and Xavier from the wagon, keeping them at gunpoint as Riker approached. "Now, Miss Porter, I'm going to make you a final offer," Riker said, his voice deceptively reasonable. "Sign over the deed to this property to me, and you and Thornton can ride back to town unharmed. Refuse and, well, accidents happen in isolated places like this." "Don't do it, Victoria," Xavier said firmly. "Once he has what he wants, we're both dead anyway." Riker shrugged. "Perhaps. But it's the only chance you have." Victoria looked around, her mind racing. She was playing for time, hoping that Sheriff Wilkins might have noticed their absence and organized a search, but the odds seemed impossibly long. "I'd like to see the cabin first," she said suddenly. "If I'm to sign away my inheritance, I should at least see what it contains." Riker considered this, then nodded. "Fair enough. Hodge, take her inside. Keep a close eye on her." "What about him?" Hodge asked, gesturing to Xavier. "Keep him out here," Riker instructed, "where I can see him." Hodge roughly guided Victoria to the cabin, pushing open the creaking door. Inside, it was dark and musty, the air heavy with the smell of abandonment. Hodge lit a lamp, revealing a simple one-room structure with a bed, table, chairs, and an old stove. "Not much to look at, is it?" Hodge commented, watching as Victoria surveyed the cabin. "Hardly worth dying over." Victoria ignored him, moving carefully around the small space. On a shelf, she noticed a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. Curious, she reached for it. "Don't touch anything," Hodge warned, but Victoria had already opened the box. Inside was a folded piece of paper, not a letter, but what appeared to be a map. Quickly, before Hodge could stop her, Victoria unfolded it, revealing a detailed drawing of the surrounding area, with one location marked with an X, and the words "main vein" written beside it. Understanding dawned this wasn't just a potential silver deposit. According to this map, there was a confirmed vein, and a substantial one at that. Her aunt had known about it but had kept the information secret. "What's that?" Hodge demanded, reaching for the map. Victoria quickly refolded it and slipped it into her sleeve. Just an old letter from my aunt. Nothing important. Hodge looked suspicious but didn't pursue it further. Come on, boss is waiting. Outside, Xavier was still standing under guard, his expression tense but determined. Riker turned as Victoria emerged from the cabin. Well, Miss Porter, are you ready to be reasonable now? Victoria straightened her shoulders, the map hidden in her sleeve giving her a new sense of purpose. Mr. Riker, I will never sell this land to you, not for any price. Riker's face hardened. That's unfortunate for both of you. He nodded to his men. Take them down by the creek. Make it look like an accident. As the men moved to obey, the sound of approaching horses suddenly broke the night's stillness. Riker whirled, his hand going to his gun, as Sheriff Wilkins rode into the clearing, accompanied by at least a dozen armed men. That's far enough, Riker, the sheriff called, his rifle aimed steadily at the rancher. Release Miss Porter and Thornton immediately. Riker's face contorted with rage. This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. Ride away while you still can. 4 armed men abducting 2 citizens of my town very much concerns me, Sheriff Wilkins replied firmly. And it seems to concern these gentlemen as well. Victoria realized with a surge of hope that the men accompanying the sheriff weren't deputies. They were ranchers and townspeople from Wilcox, including Judge Freeman, the blacksmith, and even young Tommy Wilson, all armed and determined. The town's decided it's had enough of your bullying, Riker, the sheriff continued. Time to face some consequences. Riker glanced at his men, clearly calculating the odds. 4 against more than a dozen wasn't favorable, even for gunmen of their caliber. This isn't over, Riker spat, but he gestured for his men to lower their weapons. Sheriff Wilkins dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on Riker as he approached. Emmett Riker, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. Your men, too. As the sheriff's posse moved to secure Riker and his gunmen, one of the townsmen hurried to free Victoria and Xavier from their bonds. Are you hurt? The man asked anxiously. We're all right, Xavier assured him, immediately pulling Victoria into a protective embrace once his hands were free. How did you know where to find us? Mrs. Hollister saw them forcing you into the wagon, the man explained. She sent her grandson running for the sheriff right away. Then Sheriff Wilkins gathered as many of us as he could find. Victoria leaned into Xavier's embrace, relief flooding through her. Thank you, she whispered to the townsmen. All of you, you risked your lives for us. That's what neighbors do, the man replied simply. Besides, the whole town's been waiting for someone to stand up to Riker. Looks like you two were the catalyst we needed. Sheriff Wilkins approached, having secured Riker and his men. Miss Porter, Mr. Thornton, glad we got here in time. Judge Freeman suggested we might find you at your property. Seems he was right. Judge Freeman is a wise man, Xavier said, his arm still around Victoria's shoulders. We owe him our lives, all of you in fact. The judge himself stepped forward, his elderly face grave. Not at all, son. It's about time this community stood together against tyrants like Riker. Too long we've looked the other way, each afraid to be the first to speak up. Victoria suddenly remembered the map concealed in her sleeve. Sheriff, I found something in the cabin that explains Riker's obsession with this land. She carefully extracted the map, unfolding it for him to see. It's not just potential silver deposits, there's a confirmed vein, according to this map my aunt left. Sheriff Wilkins studied the map, whistling softly. Well, that would explain a lot. Riker must have gotten wind of this somehow. What happens now? Xavier asked, looking at the bound prisoners. We take them back to Wilcox, lock them up, and send for the federal marshal, Sheriff Wilkins replied. Kidnapping's a federal offense. Riker's looking at a long stretch in territorial prison, if not worse. And his men? Victoria inquired. They'll face charges too, though perhaps less severe if they cooperate, the sheriff explained. Either way, Riker's reign of terror in this county is over. As they prepared to return to town, Xavier turned to Victoria, taking both her hands in his. Are you still willing to go through with our plan? Now that the immediate danger from Riker is past, you might want to reconsider. Victoria looked up at him, her heart full of the emotions that had grown so rapidly in their short time together. The danger may be past, but my feelings haven't changed. Have yours? Xavier's eyes softened as they held hers. If anything, they've only grown stronger. I want to marry you, Victoria Porter, not for your land or for protection, but because I believe we could build a good life together. Then my answer is still yes, Victoria said simply. Tomorrow, as planned, Judge Freeman, overhearing their exchange, smiled broadly. Did I hear something about a wedding? Xavier nodded, still looking at Victoria. Tomorrow, Judge, if you're still willing to perform the ceremony. More than willing, the judge assured them. After what you've been through, a celebration is exactly what this town needs. The ride back to Wilcox was triumphant, the townspeople treating it almost as a parade. News spread quickly, and by the time they reached Main Street, it seemed the entire population was awake and cheering despite the late hour. Riker and his men were locked securely in the jail, with volunteers stepping forward to help guard them until the federal marshal arrived. Victoria and Xavier, exhausted but elated by their narrow escape, were escorted to Xavier's house by Sheriff Wilkins and Judge Freeman. Get some rest, you two, the sheriff advised. Tomorrow's a big day. After their protectors had departed, Xavier and Victoria stood in the parlor, finally alone and safe for the first time in hours. I still can't believe what happened tonight, Victoria said, sinking onto the sofa. Or what might have happened if the sheriff hadn't arrived when he did. Xavier sat beside her, taking her hand in his. We were lucky, but I'm beginning to think luck has played a larger role in my life lately than I ever expected. What do you mean? Victoria asked. Meeting you, Xavier replied simply. Being in the right place at that exact moment to stop your abduction. Finding someone who makes me think about more than just surviving from one season to the next. Victoria felt warmth spread through her at his words. I've been thinking the same thing. What are the chances that I would inherit property in this remote corner of the territory? That I would decide to leave everything I knew to come here? That you would happen to be riding down Main Street at exactly the moment I needed help? Perhaps it wasn't chance at all, Xavier suggested, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. Perhaps some things are meant to be. Victoria smiled, leaning her head against his uninjured shoulder. A week ago, I would have dismissed such a notion as romantic nonsense. Now I'm not so sure. Xavier pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We should try to get some sleep. Our wedding day awaits. The word wedding sent a flutter of nervous excitement through Victoria. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Thornton, a name and identity she hadn't even imagined for herself a week earlier. Xavier, she said suddenly, lifting her head to look at him. There's something I want to ask you. Anything, he replied. After we're married, will we live here in town or at your ranch? It was a practical question, but one that held deeper implications about the nature of their life together. Xavier considered this thoughtfully. I'd like to show you the Diamond T. It's beautiful country, good water, rolling hills, mountains in the distance. The house isn't fancy, but it's solid and comfortable. But I know your shop is here, your new life that you've been building. A shop can be moved, Victoria said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. Or I could keep it as a town residence for when we need to be in Wilcox. but I'd like to see your ranch our ranch and make a home there with you." Joy bloomed across Xavier's face. "I'd like that too, very much." They parted for the night with a tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together, a kiss that spoke of partnership, respect, and a love that had blossomed against all odds in the harsh landscape of the Arizona Territory. The wedding the next day was simple but joyous, held in Judge Freeman's parlor with flowers hastily gathered from gardens around town. Victoria wore her best dress, a blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and carried a small bouquet of desert wildflowers that Mrs. Freeman had arranged. Word had spread throughout Wilcox, and though the ceremony itself was small, it seemed the entire town gathered outside the judge's house to offer congratulations afterward. Even Dr. Sullivan attended, pronouncing Xavier well enough for moderate celebration, with a knowing wink that made Victoria blush. "Never seen a town come together like this," Sheriff Wilkins commented as he shook Xavier's hand afterward. Riker's reign of fear kept people isolated, afraid to form alliances. Now look at them. Indeed, the impromptu wedding celebration had evolved into something of a town festival, with tables set up in the street, food appearing from every kitchen, and someone producing a fiddle for dancing. "It's wonderful," Victoria agreed, watching the townspeople laughing and talking freely. "And to think, none of this would have happened if that man hadn't tried to force me into a wagon at gunpoint." Xavier slipped an arm around her waist. "I'm grateful for that moment, terrible as it was. Without it, I might never have met you. Or you might have eventually come into my shop to buy a hat," Victoria teased. Xavier laughed. "Me in a hat shop, not likely. I've worn the same Stetson for 8 years." "Well, as your wife, I may have to do something about that," Victoria replied with a smile. "As my wife," Xavier repeated softly, the word still new and wonderful to them both. "Mrs. Victoria Thornton." "It has a nice ring to it," Victoria agreed, leaning into his embrace. The celebration continued into the evening, the newlyweds at the center of it all. When they finally returned to Xavier's house, their house now both were exhausted but happy, filled with the goodwill of the community and the promise of their future together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Xavier said as he carried Victoria across the threshold, ignoring the twinge in his injured shoulder. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she replied, her arms around his neck. "Though soon this won't be our only home." "No," Xavier agreed, setting her down gently. "In a week or two, when I'm fully healed, we'll ride out to the Diamond T. You'll love it there, especially in spring with the wildflowers blooming across the range." "I can't wait to see it," Victoria said sincerely. "To see the home you've built, the land you love." Xavier gazed down at her, his eyes full of emotion. "It will be even more beautiful with you there." Their life together began that night, not as strangers thrown together by circumstance, but as partners who had found in each other something neither had expected, a love that had grown swiftly but deeply, forged in danger and sealed in commitment. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Riker and his men were transported to Tucson for trial, the evidence against them overwhelming. The citizens of Wilcox testified willingly, no longer afraid of Riker's retribution. Victoria's silver-bearing property was properly surveyed, confirming the substantial vein her aunt's map had indicated. The railway spur was officially announced, set to begin construction the following year. As Xavier's wound healed completely, they prepared for their journey to the Diamond T Ranch. Victoria closed her shop temporarily, planning to reopen it on a part-time basis during her visits to town. "Are you sure about this?" Xavier asked as they loaded the last of their belongings into the wagon. "Leaving your shop, moving to the ranch. It's a big change." Victoria smiled, looking around at the town that had become her home in such a short time. I'm sure the shop will be here when I return. But our life together, that's what matters most to me now. The journey to the Diamond Tea took most of a day, traveling through increasingly beautiful country. As they crested a final hill, Xavier reined in the horses, allowing Victoria her first view of the ranch spread out below them, a sprawling house of stone and timber, surrounded by barns and corrals, with cattle grazing on the rolling grasslands beyond. "Oh, Xavier," Victoria breathed, taking in the scene. "It's magnificent. It's home," Xavier said simply. "Our home." As they drove down toward the ranch buildings, several cowboys rode out to meet them, whooping and calling greetings. Xavier's foreman, a weathered man named Hank, approached first, his weathered face split by a wide grin. "About time you got back, boss," he called. "And you must be Mrs. Thornton. Welcome to the Diamond Tea, madam." "Thank you, Hank," Victoria replied warmly, already feeling welcome. That evening, after a tour of the property and a hearty meal with the ranch hands, Victoria and Xavier sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Happy?" Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Very," Victoria confirmed, leaning against him. "Though I still can't quite believe how much my life has changed in such a short time. From a lonely milliner newly arrived in Wilcox to the wife of a rancher, with a silver mine and a railway connection in my future." "Our future," Xavier corrected gently. "Everything we have, we share now, the good and the bad." Victoria turned to face him, her expression serious. "I want you to know something, Xavier. Even without the silver, without the railway, I would have chosen this life with you. I would have chosen you." Xavier's eyes softened as he cupped her face in his hands. "And I you, Victoria. From the moment I saw you being forced into that wagon, something inside me knew you were meant to be part of my life. I just never imagined how completely you would change it for the better." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their bond, a bond formed in crisis, tempered by danger, and now flourishing in the peace they had found together on the frontier they both called home. In the years that followed, the Diamond Tea prospered under their joint stewardship. The silver mine on Victoria's property yielded a modest but steady income, which they invested back into the ranch and the community of Wilcox. The railway spur was completed, transforming the local economy and making the Diamond Tea one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Victoria maintained her millinery shop in town, visiting once a month to create new designs and connect with the community. Her reputation for quality and style spread throughout the region, bringing customers from as far away as Tucson. And in the spring of their second year of marriage, their joy was made complete with the birth of their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Xavier's father. As Victoria cradled their infant son on the porch of the Diamond Tea, Xavier beside her with his arm protectively around them both, she reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her to this moment. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I was just remembering that day in Wilcox," Victoria replied. "When that man tried to force me into the wagon, how terrified I was and how everything changed with a single gunshot." Xavier smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best shot I ever made." "Indeed it was," Victoria agreed, looking down at their sleeping son. "One shot that changed everything for both of us." As the sun set over the Diamond Tea, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Victoria Porter Thornton knew she had found her true home not in the bustling streets of Boston or even the frontier town of Wilcox, but here, on this ranch, with the man whose courage and compassion had saved her life and then, unexpectedly, had captured her heart. From a terrifying moment at gunpoint to a life filled with love and purpose, it wasn't the future Victoria had envisioned for herself, but it was infinitely better than anything she could have imagined. And as Xavier drew her and their son closer in his embrace, she knew that some journeys, no matter how they begin, lead exactly where you're meant to be.